Hello everyone, my name's Zenitsu, and I'm back with another Digimon deck profile video. So today I'm going to be taking a look at BT14, and BT14 offers us lots of new and powerful tools to be able to build and iterate on some new and existing decks. And today's deck I'm going to be taking a look at is going to be a new iteration on the Red-Black Greymon deck, more specifically focused on Wargreymon. So, Greymon decks have been around since BT5 as more of an archetype, and it is one of the most supported, if not the most supported deck in the game, getting a lot of updates. It's one of the best decks that has lots of versatility and variety between its offensive and defensive tools. The deck also has a solid balance of both, so no matter what version of the deck you actually end up playing with, the majority of it is going to be relatively similar, having some solid consistency, protection, damage output, and various other control tools to be able to deal with a lot of different decks in the meta. It has three main ways to be able to build the deck. Wargreymon is going to be a more aggressive version of the deck, Black Wargreymon is going to be a more defensive or control version of the deck, and you could even mix the two and run some Gaiomon in the middle just to have some more toolboxing potential that the deck can lean into to best support what you want out of its overall strategy. So no matter what version of the deck you're going to be running, it is going to be mostly similar, and your top end is going to be the only thing that's really going to be changing. But regardless, the deck it does have a few weaknesses because it is still a stack-based deck. So you need to see its specific parts and pieces in a particular order in order to get the most out of your cards. When your stacks are not exactly lined up, then you're going to definitely feel the impact when your Digimon isn't going to be able to perform as it normally should or needs to. But the deck, regardless, is still one of the best decks currently in the game, and I expect it to stay a relatively strong deck for the time being. So with all that said and done, let's just dive right into the deck profile. Starting off with the Digitamers. I'm going to be running 4 copies of the BT5 Koromon as the main Digitama. You don't necessarily have to run the BT14 one if you really don't want to, or if you do, you could run it as your 5th egg. We're utilizing our eggs to act as some solid card draw. I just prefer the condition on BT5 to be able to draw us cards because it's a when attacking ability that we could use in combination with some of our other when attacking abilities to be able to do some really fun X-antibody shenanigans versus the BT14 Koromon, which you already need to have dealt the damage in order to gain access to the card draw, but they're both still relatively solid eggs. Next, on to the level 3s. This is pretty much the de facto level 3 lineup when it comes to the main Agumons you want to be playing around. So I'm going to be playing 4 copies of the BT14 Agumon. So this is a really powerful card just because its start of main ability, as long as we have a Tamer set up, lets us Digivolve into our level 4 for free, which is really good on being able to make us tempo efficient when we're trying to catch up and to try to punish the opponent out of our raising. So this just allows us to be able to move a little bit faster with its inheritable ability, giving our Greymons and Omnimons plus 2000 DP during our turn to make sure our Digimon is going to be as strong as it possibly can. Then I'm going to be running 4 copies of the BT9 Agumon X antibody. So this is just another draw and search engine, just because we could Digivolve it on top of our other Agumons for some good cycling. It also has an on-play and when Digivolving ability, so we do have that flexibility on how we want to approach utilizing this card to be able to dig it through the top 3 cards, look for a Greymon or an Omnimon, and also look for our X antibody option. But speaking of searching and digging, I'm also going to be running 4 copies of the BT12 Agumon, just because it's one of the best Agumons that we have, allowing us to be able to reveal the top 4 for an Omnimon or a Greymon, while also being able to dig for our Taikamiya Tamer, which we have some pretty decent and solid Taikamiya Tamers we could play in the deck. Then it also has a nice DP boosting inheritable ability. It's a little bit weaker than the BT14 Agumon, but the trade-off is the fact that it works during all turns, so that plus 1000 can go a long way, not only at just you making your Digimon stronger during your turn, but having some good solid defensive lines of play, making it harder for the opponent to interact and deal with your Digimon during their turn. Next, on to the level 4s, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Greymon X Antibody. You could bump this card down to 3 and run another level 4 in its place if you really wanted to, just because we would still have 4 X Antibodies. It's just, I feel that making sure that we have protection on our Digimon is going to be super important, which is why Greymon X Antibody is so good to begin with, because of how easy it is for us to have that protection, allowing us to keep our Digimon around as long as we possibly can when we're utilizing the X antibody mechanic. So during all turns as an inheritable ability, if this Digimon has Greymon or Omnimon in its name, would be deleted, returned to the hand or bottom of the deck. Instead, we get to trash 2 cards of the same level from its Digivolution source to prevent it from leaving play, so that way we can keep our Digimon around as long as we possibly can, and that can be very annoying for the opponent. I'm also going to be running 1 copy of Greymon X Antibody from BT11, just because, again, we want that protection ability. It's a little bit different, where it's just utilizing our X Antibody option card to be able to prevent all of the same removal. But the one thing that makes this card even better than the BT9 counterpart is the tempo that it offers, which is why it got limited to 1, because of how fast the deck can move, thanks to the fact that we get to reduce the Digivolution cost of whatever Greymon we're going to be Digivolving into by 1 for each of its colors, allowing us to be able to climb faster and more efficient than what the opponent might be anticipating. Next, I'm going to be running 1 copy of the BT12 Greymon. So like I said, if you're going to be bumping down Greymon X Antibody from BT9 down to 3, you would up this one by 1, so that way you have a higher chance of seeing it, and this card is still pretty decent, allowing us to be able to play out our Tamer more efficiently if we don't have our Taikimiya set up. But if we do have a Taikimiya set up, then its when Digivolving ability is basically useless, which is the only unfortunate thing about the card. But it has that same inheritable ability as the BT12 Agumon, allowing our Greymon and Omnimons to gain plus 1000 DP during all turns. And then the last Greymon of the deck is going to be 4 copies of the starter deck 1 Greymon, just because, well, it has the inheritable ability of giving our Digimon just a blanket security attack plus 1 to make sure our Digimon can hit as strong as they possibly can. And this is kind of one of the small slight shifts in terms of build variety, is because I am Wargreymon and I do want to be as aggressive as I possibly can. Starter deck 1 Greymon allows me to do that because it just increases my overall damage output. Next, on to the level 5s, I'm going to be running 2 copies of Metal Greymon. So this is the Metal Greymon from BT12, and this is another pretty decent control tool for us to use because of the raid ability that we could use in combination with a lot of our other cards to make it very powerful push turns, just because we could use the raid and X antibody to be able to digivolve into an X antibody based Digimon to be able to gain its inheritable ability of piercing while we're already attacking into the opponent's Digimon with the highest DP. So it allows us to do some really cute things there, but it also has a nice ability during all turns. So when an attack target is switched, whether it's us blocking or us raiding, we get to play a black or red Tamer that costs 4 or less from our hand for free, having another way to be able to potentially set up our Tamers, which is really nice. And then the piercing just guarantees that we're going to be able to deal the damage when we're going to be digivolving into our higher levels. Then I'm also going to be running 2 copies of the starter deck 15 Metal Greymon. So we're not really going to be trying to use this card as a blocker. You could if you wanted to, just for some extra defensive lines of play. But we're really just looking at this card because it has that generic inheritable ability of security attack plus 1, which is why we're running the starter deck 1 Greymon to begin with. So that way we have even more ways to be able to stack security attack plus to punch the opponent's security as hard as possible. And continuing on that theme of punching the opponent's security as hard as possible, I'm also going to be running 4 copies of Metal Greymon X Antibody. So Metal Greymon X Antibody is really good at this just because when we digivolve up into him, he's going to be giving our Digimon security attack plus 1. Then if this Digimon has Greymon or the X Antibody option in its Digivolution source, it also gets plus 3000 DP until the end of the opponent's turn. And then when it comes to the level 6s, I'm going to be running 2 copies of Wargreymon. So this is the BT12 version of Wargreymon, and this is a really fantastic card to try to control the opponent's field, just because, like the Metal Greymon from BT12, it also has the raid ability to attack into the strongest Digimon on the opponent's field that's unsuspended. Then we also have a nice Wind Digivolving ability, so when we go up into this card, our Digimon's going to gain plus 3000 DP and reboot until the end of the opponent's turn. Then it also has a nice all turns ability where once per turn, when an attack target is switched, so again, whether we're attacking with raid or blocking, it doesn't matter, we get to unsuspend this Digimon for even more aggressive or defensive lines of play. Then I'm also going to be running 2 copies of the Wargreymon from BT14. So this is doing something very similar to the BT12 one, except it's when Digivolving ability gives us raid and we can attack. So it basically also gives us Pseudo Blitz at the same time, while it's when attacking ability states that if we have a Tamer in play, then this Digimon gains security attack +1 and piercing. And then on top of all of that, we even have a warp ability where if we have a Taikamiya Tamer on our field and the opponent has a Digimon with 1000 or more DP, then we get a Digivolve on top of our Agumon from our hand by paying its Digivolution cost and ignoring the Digivolution requirements. So this just allows us to have easier ways to get up into our level 6 out of nowhere to be able to surprise the opponent and try to have alternative ways to deal with the opponent's field or deal damage. And then the last level 6 of the deck is going to be 2 copies of Wargreymon X Antibody. So Wargreymon X Antibody isn't necessarily the best card for us to use. We mostly want to use our other Wargreymons a little bit more, but with the X Antibody option, it makes this card really decent, just because during all turns when a card is removed from the opponent's security stack, we get to gain 1 memory. This isn't limited to once per turn, so for each damage we're going to be dealing onto the opponent, we're going to be gaining memory back, which could set us up for another potential power play, depending on how hard we're going to be hitting the opponent. Then it also has some nice removal built into it, where at the end of the attack, if a Wargreymon or X Antibody is in this Digimon's Digivolution source, then we get to delete one of the opponent's Digimon with DP equal to or less than this Digimon. And then when it comes to the level 7s, I'm going to be running 1 copy of the BT5 Omnimon. So this Omnimon is still just really good at being able to close out games because of its Wind Digivolving ability of Blitz, combined with the Wind Digivolving ability to be able to unsuspend this Digimon. The built-in protection is nice, but most of the time we're just using it for its 2 Wind Digivolving abilities to push for extra damage or close out games. And that's kind of the similar role that Omnimon X Antibody from BT10 is fulfilling, just because we're going to have some decent removal attached to it when we Digivolve up into it, and when we're going to be attacking, we also get a look at their security and just yeet the best card out of it, so that way we could take security threats out of their security, or just ripping through the last card in their security to be able to close out the game with. And then when it comes to the Tamers, I'm going to be running 3 copies of Taikamiya. So this is the BT12 version of Taikamiya, and this is allowing us to be able to give our Agumons or Greymons plus 1000 extra DP and the blocker ability until the end of the opponent's turn, so that way we have some defensive lines of play to pair up with our offensive lines of play. Then the other important thing about this card is the fact that it's helping with our overall tempo, because when we Digivolve into a Greymon or Omnimon, we get to suspend this Tamer to gain a memory. This does work with our X forms to make up plays possible that might not have been otherwise. Then I'm also going to be running 2 copies of the BT1 Taikamiya. So this is going to be the deck's dedicated memory fixing Tamer, always making sure that we're at 3 memory to do whatever we need to with. Then on top of that, as long as our Digimon is red and has 4 or more sources, which is not hard to do at all in this deck, then it's going to give our Digimon an extra security attack plus, so that way we could punch as hard as we humanly possibly can. So this, in combination with starter deck Greymon, Metal Greymon X, allows us to basically punch through all 5 of the opponent's security with very little effort. And then on top of that, the last Tamer of the deck is going to be 2 copies of Cool Boy. So Cool Boy is a consistency tool to look for our X Antibody traded Digimons and our X Antibody traded options. Then on top of that, it's also a really good tempo tool for when we're Digivolving into the same level that is an X Antibody traded Digimon on top of our base to gain an extra memory and draw an extra card, allowing us to be even more tempo efficient. And then when it comes to the options, I'm going to be running 2 copies of the X antibody option. So this just allows us to be able to do lots of cute and cheeky combo plays just because of its inheritable ability to allow us to digivolve into an X antibody traded Digimon mid-combat from our hand. Then I'm also going to be running 2 copies of Offensive Training, so this is just one of the best digging tools that we have at trying to look for not only just our Digimon, but our Tamers and our options as long as they're red, which the majority of them are. Then it has the delay ability to have one of our Digimon digivolve into a red Digimon from our hand for its Digivolution cost, and when we use this effect to digivolve, we get to reduce the cost by 2, making it even more efficient to digivolve into our higher stages, allowing the deck to move even faster. Then I'm also going to be running 1 copies of Hades Force as the big removal card, just to try to deal with some of the opponent's problematic Digimon or their Tamers. But that's pretty much it for the main deck, and as I mentioned before, there is just a whole bunch of different cards and different ways to be able to approach this deck just because of the Greymon synergy and how many Greymon-based cards that are good that we can play with and would want to play with, so it's really just customizing the deck to fit your own personal needs. So as far as some potential future upgrades, well, as of right now, there really isn't any direct upgrades that we can see. So what you get is kind of just what we have for the foreseeable future, and it's up to you to be able to tech the deck to utilize all the different tools to be able to handle the given meta that you're going to be playing up against. We do have to remember that Greymon is one of the more popular and widely used Digimon in the franchise, so it's more than likely that it will eventually get some support in the future in some way, shape, or form.